Let's talk about love.
Let's talk about love. Fine.
But it's such a vast subject that in mythology, that if I had come to you and said, let's talk about love, but where should we begin? What would your answer have been?
I think my answer would have been the troubadours in the 12th century. Let's begin there.
Why the troubadours?
Well, because they're the first ones in the West that really considered love in the sense that we think of it now as a person-to-person relationship.
You're talking about romantic love?
Yes. It's the seizure that comes in recognizing as where your soul's counterpart in the other person. And that's what the troubadours stood for. And that has become the ideal in our lives today. Then the other love, the Christian love of agape, spiritual love, love thy neighbor as thyself. Again, it doesn't matter who the person is. I mean, it's your neighbor. You must have that kind of love. But the kind of seizure that comes from the meeting of the eyes, as they say, in the troubadour tradition, and the purely personal, person-to-person thing, as far as I know, it originates as an ideal to be lived for with the troubadours.
You've said that what happened in the 12th and 13th centuries was one of the most important mutations of human feeling and spiritual consciousness, that a new way of experiencing love came to expression.
Yes.
And it was in opposition to that ecclesiastical despotism of the heart.
Yes.
Which required people, particularly young girls, barely out of adolescence, to marry whomever the church or their parents wanted them to marry.
That's right.
And what had this done to the passion of the heart?
Well, to say a word for the other before I do this, the usual marriage in traditional cultures is arranged for by the families. It's not a person-to-person decision at all. And this is true to this day in many parts of the world. This is not to say that in arranged marriages of this kind there is no love. There is a lot of love. There's family love and a rich love life on that level. So in the Middle Ages, of course, that was the kind of marriage that was sanctified by the church. And so the idea of a real person-to-person marriage was very dangerous.
Dangerous because it was heresy.
It was not only heresy, it was adultery. And that was punishable by death. For instance, in the Tristan romance, that's the crucial romance.
Tristan and Isolde?
Yes. Isolde was engaged to marry King Mark. They had never seen each other. And Tristan is sent over to fetch Isolde to Mark. And Isolde's mother prepares a love potion so that the two who are to be married will have real love for each other. And these two youngsters, they think the love potion is wine, and they drink it, and then they're overtaken with this love. But Brangane, the nurse of Isolde, realized what had happened. She went to Tristan and said, "You have drunk your death." And Tristan said, "If by my death you mean this agony of love, that is my life. If by my death you mean the punishment that we are to suffer, if discovered, which is namely execution, I accept that. But if by my death you mean eternal punishment in the fires of hell, in which these people believed, I accept that too."
That was
That's big stuff.
For a medieval Catholic, because they believed in a literal hell.
Well, these people did.
Yes. So what's the significance of what he was saying?
What he was saying is that this love is bigger even than death, than pain, than anything. This is the affirmation of the pain of life in a big way.
And I would choose this pain for love now, even though it might mean everlasting pain and damnation in hell.
That's right.
And that was a marked change in how people...
Well, that is any life career that you choose in following your bliss should be chosen with that sense. Nobody can frighten me off from this thing.
This is sort of the beginning of the romantic idea of the Western individual taking matters into his or her own hand.
Well, absolutely. I mean, you can see there are examples in Oriental stories of this kind of thing, but it did not become a social system. It has now become the ideal, at any rate, of love in the Western world.
What did you mean, Joe, when you said that the triumph of Tristan's view of love and vision of love, this beginning of romantic love in the West, was libido over credo?
Well, the credo, I believe, and I believe not only in the laws, but I believe that these laws were instituted by God, and there's no arguing with God. I mean, these laws are just a heavy weight on me, and disobeying those is sin, and it has to do with my eternal character.
And the libido?
Libido is the impulse to life.
Comes from where?
Comes from the heart.
And the heart is what?
The heart is the organ of opening up to somebody else. That's the human quality, as opposed to the animal qualities, which have to do with primarily with self-interest. Opening up to that which is other is the opening of the heart. And that's as the troubadours saw it. It is the opening of the heart.
I can certainly understand, though, why the church was threatened by this, because how can you have a church if everyone's libido is her own God?
Why not? Why can't the church handle that? If you can sanctify a marriage that has been arranged, why can't you sanctify a marriage where two people have joined each other?
So the courage to love became the courage to affirm against tradition. Whatever knowledge stands confirmed in one's own experience.
Yeah.
Why was that important in the evolution of the West?
Well, it was important in that it gives the West this accent, as I've been saying, on the individual. That he should have faith in his experience and not simply mouth terms that have come to him from other mouths. I think that's the great thing in the West. The validity of the individual's experience of what humanity is, what life is, what values are, against the monolithic system.
Was there some of this in the legend of the Holy Grail?
Yes. Wolfram has a very interesting statement about the origin of the Grail. He says, the Grail was brought from heaven by the neutral angels. There was the war in heaven between God and Lucifer and the angelic hosts that sided, one group with Lucifer and the other with God. Pair of opposites, good and evil, God and Satan. The Grail was brought down through the middle, the way of the middle, by the neutral angels.
What is the Grail representing then?
Well, the Grail becomes what can we call it? That which is attained and realized by people who have lived their own lives. What that means is that the Christian separation of matter and spirit, of the dynamism of life and the spiritual, natural grace and supernatural grace, has really castrated nature. And the European mind, the European life has been, as it were, emasculated by this. The true spirituality which would have come from this has been killed. And then what did the pagan represent? He was a person from the suburbs of Eden. He was regarded as a nature man. And on the head of his lance was written the word Grail. That is to say, nature intends the Grail. Spiritual life is the bouquet of natural life, not a supernatural thing imposed upon it. And so the impulses of nature are what give authenticity to life. Not obeying rules come from a supernatural authority. That's the sense of the Grail.
And the Grail that these romantic legends were searching for is the union, once again, of what had been divided? The peace that comes from joining?
The Grail becomes symbolic of an authentic life that has lived in terms of its own volition, in terms of its own impulse system, which carries it between the pairs of opposites of good and evil, light and dark. Wolfram starts his epic with a short poem saying every act has both good and evil results. Every act in life yields pairs of opposites in its results. The best we can do is lean toward the light, as they intend the light. And what the light is that of the harmonious relationships that come from compassion with suffering, understanding of the other person. This is what the Grail's about.